Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, Supply Chain Insights, the podcast for your supply chain leader who is on the go and wants to be in the know. And now, your host, Laura Ciceri.
My name is Laura Ciceri, and I am the founder of Supply Chain Insights. And today it gives me great pleasure to interview Gains and Bill on his journey for Supply Chain 2030 and his advice for customers. Now, Bill, you and I have known each other for now 2 decades, right? And so as you look at 2030, what do you think that looks like? And let's start with having you tell the group a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Gains, and then let's get into 2030.
Great. Thank you, Laura. I'm happy to be here. I'm also really excited to return to your conference. It was great being in person 2021. Look forward to it this year. Had a lot of excellent connection with thought leaders, peers, prospective customers and partners. It was really, really helpful. So thank you for the invite. Look forward to it. So Supply Chain 2030. First of all, I feel almost hubristic in saying that I can predict, 8 years, much less 8 quarters. But we are thinking in those terms, right? Because I think the plan is not much, but planning is everything, right? So we're planning towards that. Let me digress and talk a little bit about GAINSystems, our company, Gains and myself. My father and I founded GAINSystems. I'm a co-founder here. We've tried to blaze a trail at the intersection of innovation and pragmatism. We're headquartered here in Chicago, have a worldwide team now, but we've always focused on solving real world problems and iterating until everything we do that's flashy is replicable and achievable. So that's sort of our mission, if you will. We've done that with a combination of solid solutions engineering, but also Gains Labs, which is a group of R&D experts that try to tackle real world problems rather than ivory tower theory. So that's a little bit about us. In terms of returning to Supply Chain 2030, I'd say there's probably 4 key points I'd emphasize, if we're looking at a very high level. First is a concept, and Laura, we've talked about this, of redesigning work, right? So there's a great book called Racing with the Machines, right, by Eric Brynjolfsson. He's an expert on AI from MIT. And he talks about artificial intelligence and machine learning not as a replacement for human intuition and cognition, but as an amplifier of it. So how do we learn how to train, refresh, and revise these models, particularly because they're just historical projectors, right? So when new events that are not within the test data set occur, like say a pandemic, for example, they won't have the answers, right? So how do we redesign work to race with the machines, not against them? And look at that from both a buy role perspective. What does that look like for an executive? What does it look like for a decision scientist? What does it look like for a practitioner trying to execute a plan on a day-by-day basis? But then also, how do we redesign collaboration among roles? So both within and among. And I think that's going to be a key element of how supply chain is viewed in 2030. It's going to be much less tactical, much more collaborative and Pareto driven, et cetera, we believe. Go ahead, sorry.
So, Bill, let's talk a little bit about your lab, because typically you will come and you'll bring Chandler, who's doing a lot of really great lifting around thinking about new ways to process data, new ways to do engines. As you think about 2030 and some of the work that you're doing in the labs, what excites you?
Well, what excites us, I think, is devising problem-specific solutions that can be generalized. So, for example, one of our customers realized that their backward look on actually observed lead times was not giving them anywhere near what's needed to sense what our next lead time is likely to be. And in developing a lead time sensing model for them, we realized that same type of model applied very well for things like demand allocation, et cetera. and how do we work with citizen scientists on their end that can wrangle and feed the input data without having to know, exactly the modeling process, but enough of a glass box. If I put this in, here's what I'm likely to get out, and create, accessible AI. So I think that's what excites us about GAINS Labs and some of the other things we're doing about like by period AI demand planning, like having one model for tomorrow, a different model for next week, a different model for this month, a different model for next quarter, a different model for 5-year projection, rather than trying to force one across all those horizons. Those are a couple examples, I think, that are quite exciting.
Yeah, and I think the tie for a demand visibility signal there is a natural, as we think about visibility, we've always talked about supply visibility, but I think one of the things that we'll have as we move into 2030 is demand visibility. And I think some of the work that you and Chandler are doing around that telescoping demand signal would be great for people to talk to you about at the summit. So 2030, you think we're going to redesign work, and a lot of it is going to be around better insights, getting the right data to workers. What else do you think it looks like?
Second point would be, I think we're going to see nimble, continuously optimized networks rather than static flows, right?
Yes.
So the pre-pandemic equilibrium was long-term contracts, fixed, one container a month from Shanghai to Long Beach, steady Eddie, if you will. And now I think we're going to have multiple suppliers for any one component or finished good, both for resilience, but also for trying to onshore or reshore, right? So you might have 80% coming from a low-cost, long lead time, high variability vendor, and then 2 or 3 vendors that fill in the remaining 20% more nimbly. And they may change month to month, not year to year or Olympic cycle to Olympic cycle. So how do you continuously optimize new networks, map demands as your customers change, volumes change, transport rates change your methods of shipping, try to include things like carbon footprint, where can we move from truck to train because we can plan better and reduce the footprint by 90+%. I think these are going to be big questions, big objectives in 2030. That would be the second one. I could go on with the third and fourth if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead. Tell me what you think the third one is.
So the third one is, how do you, and you've challenged us with this, Laura, so I'm parroting back a little bit, but I have an answer, which is definitely not the answer, I'm sure, and it may not even be part of the answer, but how do you define a good plan or good planning, right? This is almost like an epistemological question. And I think in 2030, we're going to be looking at a good plan or a good planning process as one that delivers the targeted results by provision of actionable information that comports to current constraints and messages those actions at each role level in a way that those roles can collaborate efficiently and or automatically, if you will. These roles, one of the roles might be a machine learning algorithm. One of the things I found fascinating is the great PE firm that we partnered with, Francisco Partners, and others have talked about having one of the votes on their investment committee being an algorithm. Not the only vote, but a vote, right? And that way you can eliminate some bias and things like that. So I think that's going to be part of it. Good plans are based on their ability to achieve outcomes, not any specific function or S&OP budget adherence or what have you, but the outcome is EBITDA and fill rate. Well, then a plan that fulfills those is a good plan, right?
So let me be sure I've got this redesign work, and part of what you think in the redesign work is better insights to people by role. And the second one was really about the design of the nimble supply chain that looks not just at what we've got today, but how do we have a much more nimble design? And then the third is, how can we make sure we have a good plan? I think those are great. Anything else you'd add to the list?
I think The last one is achieving the long sought collaboration across enterprises, right? We've talked about CFPR and other things, and those tactically have delivered. But when it comes to having multiple suppliers for the same product with resilience, high degrees of variability, right? How do we manage that across enterprises with optimized buffers rather than silos of safety stock? That would be the fourth point. But look, we're a little bit inventory optimization centric, right? Certainly not our whole game, but that's where we came from. So I had to throw that in because we do believe that as we move from just in time to just in trouble and getting out of that mode, that this is going to be key, particularly with interest rates rising and things. That might be a little more short term, but maybe not. Right. So.
Yeah, I think maybe not. Now, one of the speakers is actually a GAINS customer. And I know you work with OptiLogic on the simulation and optimization of inventory in the face of variability. You want to talk a little bit about that case study as people get ready for the conference?
Yeah, that'd be great. So, traditional network design studies or projects tend to use a lot of heuristics because the nature of those optimization methods forces some level of aggregation to do analysis by flow and family, if you will. And sometimes there's quite simplistic heuristics around what would the inventory costs and profiles be amongst these. And look, when the cost of inventory is near zero, that's probably not horrendous. But what they were keen on is making sure that whatever scenarios they chose to implement would reflect what they're going to plan and execute in the future. So we worked with OptiLogic to create an embedded inventory optimization algorithm that each of their scenarios would call and understand what is the true multi-echelon, supplier, hub, DC branch, interconnected inventory that scenario would result in / require. And in so doing, created what is a really actionable plan as opposed to a theoretical scenario that needs a lot of work to go from there to implement it. So that's exciting. And I think for sophisticated design project, greenfield, et cetera, they brought something to the table there for sure. So it's good collaboration.
Yeah, and I think it really gets to the second point you made around design flows and using better math around design flows. So I'd encourage everyone that comes to the summit to talk to Bill about redesigning work and inventory and the great work he's doing in the lab. And I look forward to seeing you there in Washington. I think you've been at most of my summits, and so it's always great to see you in the audience.
We've actually used the artist, the graphic designer that does those amazing infographics with the flow of demand, et cetera. So absolutely, look forward to it. Thank you for the time, Laura.
Okay, until then, thank you, Bill.